There she is. Hey, Dr. Sonia.
Hey, hello. There you go, Dr. Williams. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pathways Theological Education Incorporated. We are a expression of the progressive Christian movement, and so happy to see everyone here today. As I look at the names that are loading up, we are expecting well over 200 people to participate in this webinar, which lends its hand to the importance of the conversation that we're having today and how it is affecting our congregations, our clergy members, and our community worldwide today. So welcome to each and every one of you. My name is Sonia Van, and I am the Executive Director of Pathways Theological Education Incorporated. Today, we have a wonderful panel of educators, of hospice chaplains, of pastors, and of wider members of the community of faith who are sharing today in a conversation about death, dying, and grief in isolation. As we have that conversation today, I want to allow you to engage with us by going into your Q&A, which is at the very bottom of your Zoom screen, and please putting in your answers and typing in, your questions. And as our panel today has a conversation led by Reverend Blackman, we will then go into questions that you lift up, or they will engage them as we go throughout the day, depending on how the conversation goes. You are welcome to in this place to share the conversation. We are welcome in this place to engage in your questions. And please know that Pathways Theological Education is not just an online resource for ministry preparation. We are also a resource for continuing education, for critical thought and webinars such as these, and for interest-based studies and certifications, and like I said, continuing education. So please go to the pathwaystheological.org website and look and see at all the different options that we have. That's pretty much the commercial for tonight. The rest of it's all engagement. So thank you all for that and allowing me to go into that. I want to first introduce to some, but not many, and present to others the Reverend Tracy Blackman, who is Associate Minister of the wider United Church of Christ over local church and justice ministries. I am happy to call her my pastor. And my colleague in ministry, former alum of Eden Theological Seminary, but more than that, a godly woman who is a friend. And so as she leads us tonight in this conversation, I want to say first and foremost to her, thank you for agreeing to do this, and to each and every one of our panelists. This is a wonderful day, and I'm so happy that we have finally made it to this day. So the preparations are now underway. So as I turn it over to her, thank you so much. And guys, thank you all for participating.
Thank you so much, Minister Sonia, for having me on, and congratulations on your position at Pathways. I know wonderful things are ahead because you are there. You are such a leader. I'm excited and honored to have this conversation tonight about death, dying, and grief and isolation, because it's such a needed conversation right now in our communities. Joining us for discussion are people who have not only experience in pastoral care in this area, but also expertise. I'd like to introduce you to our panelists this evening, beginning with Reverend Dr. Keith Stewart. Reverend Stewart holds a degree from the University of Kentucky in History and English. From the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, he received his MDiv and a Master's of Theology and Homiletics, and also holds a PhD in New Testament theology. He spent 6 months at the University of Cape Town, South Africa, completing his dissertation, and he is the published author of numerous sermons and articles. He's putting the final touches on his book, Letting Go of True Belief, a spiritual memoir on being lost and found. He enjoys writing fiction, reading history, classic literature, and playing his guitar. And he is also, on your bio, it says an acceptable golfer. Should that be exceptional, or is acceptable intended?
I don't embarrass myself.
An acceptable golfer. So we welcome you to this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Stewart. We also have with us Reverend Dr. Sonia Williams. Reverend Williams holds degrees from Berea College of Kentucky in Communication and Business Administration, from Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary, where she received her MDiv, and a PhD in Practical Theology from St. Thomas University. Dr. Williams is certified in thanatology, the study of the phenomenon of death, and the psychological mechanisms to cope with dying, death, and grief. Her PhD dissertation is entitled, We All Die Alone, a practical theological exploration. She is a sought-after preacher, teacher, and conversationalist on the subject of death, dying, and grief, and its most communal expressions. Currently, Reverend Williams, Dr. Williams, serves as Dean of Students at Eden Theological Seminary, where she oversees admissions, student life programs, and houses of study. That's a whole lot that she's overseeing currently. Welcome, and we are so delighted and excited to have you here tonight to glean from your wisdom. And finally, we have another Eden alum, Chaplain Julie Strassman. Reverend Strassman is a hospice chaplain, grief counselor who practices with Bethesda Hospice Care in St. Louis, Missouri. She is a graduate of Eden Theological Seminary and a current DMin student. Her work is an expression of her care of those who are actively dying in isolation. Again, welcome to all of you. As our listeners engage with us in this conversation, please feel free to add your questions to the Q&A session or to the chat. We will try to monitor both and incorporate as many questions as possible, and then have a question and answer session for about the last 10 or 15 minutes of our time together. We had a question that came up before we even started. Is this an hour-long webinar? It's an hour and a half. So we will talk for approximately an hour, and then we'll let the chat do the rest and engage you in those conversations. It tends to go pretty quickly. There are other questions queuing up, but I'm going to save a few of those until we actually dive in. I don't know how many of you got to see the New York Times front page on Sunday. It was a very powerful visual to have 1,000 names completely fill the front page of the New York Times. And each one of those names represented 100 people who have died in the US alone from COVID. We have already approached over 300,000, closer to 400,000, who have lost their lives globally to this virus. That's a lot of death. And not that we don't have death all the time. It is a part of the cycle of life. But what I've noticed in this moment is that people are dying so rapidly from COVID that many of the rituals and practices that we have adopted, whatever your rituals might be, have been interrupted. We cannot have our families present because of the isolation of the disease. And we also are suffering from the absence of communal grief, which is also a part of the healing process for many. When you have people dying at the rates we have them dying right now, you lose everything, including their names. So what we have been relegated to are statistics instead of naming those who we've lost in a public way. That was one of the things that was so powerful about the New York Times article. To say people's names is to honor their humanity and their divinity. And I was growing increasingly worried that we had all of these deaths happening, and not only were we being denied the presence in that sacred time, but also the honor of calling their names out loud and having that recognized communally. I want to start by just opening it up and hearing from each of you how you are feeling in this moment around this topic and the gravity of the amount, the sheer volume of death. And that's just from COVID. We do have people who are dying for other reasons, dying for natural causes, dying from other disease processes. What are your opening thoughts about some of that? If you don't mind, Dr. Williams, I'll start with you. You're muted, you're muted.
That is great information. Thank you. No, thank you, Reverend Tracy and Sonia Van and Pathways for this opportunity. But you're absolutely right. You know, being able to speak names, being able to look at tradition, look at the rituals that have been taking place for this long. But I think I stand in a little different place in that I find that it's important for not only for us to grieve communally, but this is more so an opportunity to heal communally. And so often we tend to focus on that who have died. But in this place of isolation and loneliness, it's essential to look at the ones who are dying and the ones who are still living. When we talk about that person who has died and us and the inability to grieve that loss, there's a lot of questions that surround that of are we grieving the loss of the inability to help them while they were living? And so there's, and that's kind of part of your opening statement is that there is death that surrounds us, you know, for varying reasons. But we're having a hard time with death. We're having a hard time with the dying process because essentially I believe that the question is, who has taught us how to die? And so those are some of the leading thoughts for me is, how are we grieving? What are we grieving? And have we even been taught the process to do it? You're muted, Tracy.
I said it to you and then I did it myself. Thank you for that. And I want to hold that because I want us to come back to what it means to be taught how to die, what it means to be taught how to die. Dr. Stewart, what would you like to add to the conversation around?
Yeah. Am I muted as well?
No, we hear you.
Okay, good. I guess I choose to think of the metaphor of lost and found. I think we are all living in just a lost world. We're isolated, separated to the point where we have no bearings. We have no measuring stick by which to guide our lives. And I think I'm trying to work through some ideas of maybe this lost period is something that can indeed be instructive, even blessed as we make our way through. And I also think that the the idea of found looks completely different now than it did 3 months ago. So as a pastor, I am overwhelmed at just the overwhelming loss of community. As Sonia was saying, just the communal aspect of being together in such a way that we can bind our hearts and try to find some healing. So those are just my initial thoughts.
Thank you. And Chaplain Julie, you work in an environment where even outside of COVID, you may have the privilege of walking in that sacred space with people. What are your initial thoughts around this conversation tonight?
So one thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is just the importance of physical proximity and touch when we think about dying and when we think about grief. You know, if you look at a lot of our rituals around dying, they involve being physically present, sitting vigil, holding the person's hand, being able to do simple things like brush their hair and talk to them. And this isn't something that people are being able to do right now in so many settings, both in hospitals and in many nursing facilities as well, nursing homes, for example. And so that carries over to how we grieve, because so many of our grieving rituals are the same. They involve touching people. You know, if you go to a funeral, there's usually a reception line. You go down the line, you shake hands, you hug people, you bring them food, you feed them physically, you touch them physically, and we're not being able to do those things. So even when we're able to gather, we can't touch. And I think that the embodiment of touch is so relevant, both in our faith and in what we're dealing with right now.
Thank you. I'm remembering visiting a church in Minnesota, and they were having a conference. And one of the booths at the conference was for essential oils and bath salts and those things to help you relax. But there was one segment at this booth that was about healing products and oils and bath salts and creams. And some of it was packaged in jars depending on what your ailment was, right? So if you were having heart trouble, there was a jar for that. That was kind of a kit of care for someone who was caring for someone who had heart issues. There was some for emotional issues. But what got my attention was that there was a huge mason jar for the act of dying. I want to come back to what you said about that, Sonia. I engaged the vendor at that table, and what she shared was in her hospice work, she had taken care of a family who was Muslim, and the mother died, and all of the daughters of the mother came to the room prior to the body being removed, and they had a complete ritual of washing the body and singing over the body and speaking into the body and celebrating, to use your word, the release of the spirit of their mother, and caring for that body and lotioning it. And she was so stricken by that she created this jar to kind of mimic that for people who were walking with people who were actively dying. I'm intrigued by what you said, Dr. Williams, about no one has taught us how to die. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I have almost a decade of experience in hospice care.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an opportunity to really sit at the bedside and not just minister. So some people get this impression that all chaplains do is pray with folk.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a whole lot that goes on at the side of the bed. There's a whole lot of family dynamics. There is so much that's happening. And in the midst of trying to get the family to understand, not even the one who is dying. The one who is dying is full of wealth of information and knowledge, and we can talk about that soon. But the family is the one who has the questions, who is saying, Chap, you know, I've never seen this before. This isn't what happened on TV. This is taking too long. I've never seen this. And so then the question becomes, well, who would have told them or taught them how to die?
Mm-hmm.
And so often it is the television shows that is teaching us. But I believe that there's a responsibility of the church, of the pastor, of the leader to also do some of this teaching. I was once a pastor. I am a pastor. So the onus is on us. But sometimes we have fallen short because we are so inundated with teaching people how to live. how to live abundantly, how you got to live your best life now.
Mm-hmm.
But in the midst of doing that, there comes a time when we have to die. Even if we're looking at the Christian faith, if we're looking at what Jesus did, the plight of Jesus, Jesus made his way to the cross unto death. So we all have to experience it, but are we really teaching that beyond Resurrection Sunday and Good Friday? And so there has to be a teaching that goes with that. Now, with the jar of healing, I find that profound. And there are some rituals that we want to hold on to. There are some things that we want to bring forward from our ancestors. But there's also a word that I associate with that called tradition. And all tradition isn't necessary in the right now, in the current place. And so we have to be able to gauge and look for what traditions do we build on? What are the legacies? What are the things that our ancestors did that are viable right now? But when that tradition is no longer good or safe or helpful for the sake of all, then what do we do with that tradition?
I'm watching the chat as well, and there are a lot of comments about fear, about being afraid, whether that's personal fear or whether that's fear because I don't know what to do when this is happening in my congregation or to my congregants. There is some feelings of death stalking us, someone says, as though there's so many people dying that it's a miracle that I'm not dying, right? That we feel like in any moment we might be stalked. Someone makes a point that says we don't honor death the way that we honor life. Dr. Williams, to say something that you were saying, we avoid talking about it because it's scary and because it's unknown for a lot of people. In your work in the nursing homes, Chaplain Julie, what is your experience with families who are wrestling with some of the very things Dr. Williams mentions here?
I think the thing that people fear most is that they won't be able to be there for their loved one, that they won't be able to be with them. And honestly, I think that a lot of the fear comes out of this feeling that we won't be able to be together. We're very lucky with technology that we can connect in so many creative ways. But when someone's on their deathbed, they really can't do a webinar anymore. We can hold up a tablet to them and they can speak to them through that tablet. But again, the physicality of sitting vigil is what's lost. And I think that a lot of this fear that people have is simply the fear of being alone, being separated from the people that they love. And what Tanya said is absolutely right. The idea that we have to find new ways to do these things that we can't do right now, whether that's new ways of sitting vigil, whether that's new ways of having funerals. But I think so much of this fear is that we are reinventing all of these traditions. We are trying to make a new path, and we're trying to do it together and yet apart. And that's very difficult to do. So I think a lot of the fear just comes from the unknown, how quickly everything has changed, and the inability to really be together in ways that feel meaningful at the end of life.
But there's a theology somewhere. What is the theology? Because I'm still wrestling. I'm listening to what you're saying, Chaplain Julie, and I'm wrestling with something you said, Dr. Sonia. What is our theology about this? We have a theology about death because we have the crucifixion and we have lots of stories about death in our scripture, in our sacred text. We have a theology about life everlasting because we have a resurrection story and we have stories of Jesus bringing back people from the dead. But we really don't have much text about what happens in between, right? We preach Good Friday, we preach Easter Sunday. We don't preach the Saturday, right? So what is the theology that we're sharing with people about death? And I'll tell you, I will confess, when I was a new pastor, before I was a pastor, I did a lot of backseat driving. And one of my irritants was to go to funerals and a preacher say someone was going to heaven. I'm like, you don't know where anybody is going. You can only speak for the right now, right? When I get to be a pastor, I'm never going to say that. My very first funeral, what did I do? They're going to heaven, right? Because that was comforting. So what is our theology about death? What is that theology?
Well, I want to start with just simply the definition of death.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I work with people, this is usually what I ask them to do, is to define death. It's not what mama told us. It's not what we saw on television, but we have to have our own understanding, our own theology, our own construct of what death is. And for those of us who subscribe to Christianity, most of us say that there is life after death. Or we might say that death is what comes at the end of a hard life. But whatever the answer is, whatever one defines death to be, then we can put that right up against the word faith. And understanding one's theology of faith. Faith is not this thing that I hope. It's not this thing that I hope that the chair doesn't fall when I sit in it. Faith is the actual walk that we are trying to do, that we are practicing. We are believing God to do a thing. And whatever that thing is, then it is for us to put some action. And so I believe that all of this faith walk puts us right up to the door of death. So how we live then also should be connected to how we die.
Mm.
So I'm going to start with our faith walk and defining death.
Okay. Dr. Stewart, let me hear from you. As a pastor, what is your theology that you share around death?
Oh my gosh. I'll just tell you a story. When I was being considered for the church I'm now serving, we had lost 2 young people in a tragic automobile accident. And so we spent 6 weeks talking about the many layers of death, okay? And it was pretty sobering, even black. So the church almost decided not to pursue me because the sermons were dark. And I just think you all have, you've marked the territory very well. But I don't know, Dr. Williams, she speaks about the faith journey butting up against death's door. I guess my theology is about death is not to be afraid of opening that door. And my understanding of faith is certainly not being certain about everything. We have no idea, what God has in store for us. And part of our problem is that we've done such a poor job of talking about faith as an expression of whatever it means to have afterlife, that we haven't been able to talk in any cogent manner about what it means to not be afraid of opening that door. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, that's what I try to share with my congregation. There are a certain number of days that we have. That is a given. So your theology begins with your life is limited, okay? What you do with it then is up to you, okay? But that is a primary thing for me. We have a limited number of days. And then, so that's how I share. I don't think you can separate a theology of death from a theology of life. So, I mean, that's how I understand it.
Thank you. Rachel's in our chat, and I want to read you what she says. She says, I worry for people in my congregation who are not having any memorial services or funerals or rituals right now. We've had several deaths in the last few months, but no memorial services. And it just went away. Though the pastors are available and we use Zoom, we can use Zoom as a safe way to gather, families seem to just want to skip it. And I wonder what that will mean long term for families and for our communities. What I hear her speaking to is the work of grief, the work of grief, if one subscribes to the belief that there is work that grief has to do. And you may disagree with that. I'd like for you to talk a little bit about that, though, whether it's an agreement or disagreement. Is there work that grief has to do for us to be able to move on in a healthy and stable way? Kathleen, Julie?
So first, I would just like to say there is so much being written about this right now. I've been reading a lot of articles. David Kessler comes to mind about how important it is, even in the midst of this pandemic, for us to have funerals and memorials. And so I would advise everyone to find some way to try to do that. With families who want to skip it, to find ways to encourage them, even to just have a small family service, even just to do something in their homes, but to find some way that they can gather and begin grieving. And I do believe that there is work to be done with grief. I think that grief isn't something that you can just sit with and allow it to take its time. And that doesn't mean that you can plow through it or that you can, shovel your way out of it. But it does mean that grief is something that we have to actively struggle with. And one of the very first things that we have to do is to just acknowledge the reality of the death. And when you don't have those services, when you haven't been with the person when they died, when you didn't see their body at a funeral, when you didn't even have a memorial where people can gather and say, we acknowledge that this person is no longer physically with us, and now together we begin the journey of mourning their life and learning to live without them physically present. If you don't have those things, you can't even begin to start processing and start your grief journey.
So I'm going to push back from the chat a little bit. The same person who asked the original question says, I wonder how we can help people who feel as though grief should not be a part of the experience of life, as people who believe in life after death. Do we need a theology of grief that goes hand in hand with our theology of death? And that's not everyone's story, but certainly I'm from traditions that the thought is that there is life after death, and glorious life at that. So how does all of that fit into this grief pattern?
Well, do you want me to answer?
Sure.
May I jump in? Okay. I think Julie is spot on. I have 9 memorial services to do. Okay. Once the protocols are in place, and the 9 have it's now 7 because 2 of the families have decided that they will just do a picnic later. Okay. So the grief work has not been done, and I think people are fearful of. There is something to be said that in the closeness that the closer we are to the death moment and the final burial or cremation or whatever, there's something sacred about that, and that it doesn't bring a closure to grief, but it does give an ending so that the grief process can begin and we can move beyond shock and awe. So that, I think, Julie, I think you're right on. I think you're.
You want to weigh in, Dr. Sonia?
I do, just for the sake of disagreement. Rituals are important, and processing that grief is absolutely important. But I feel that sometimes we are getting caught up in the where this is taking place and the how it's taking place, and that we can't wait to get back to the sanctuary to do it, or the funeral parlor, because that's a particular place where it's supposed to be held. But right now, in the midst of this shelter in place and being removed from our sanctuaries, I can't help but to wonder, is this now the time and the opportunity to shift and then to begin creating a new ritual? to be able to make this something that is personalized and meaningful, not for the sake of tradition, but for the sake of going through the process. Going back to trying to understand what death is. So if we don't understand what death is, have we taken the time to understand what grief is and what that looks like and how do we process it? So I'm not convinced that rituals have to look the same. I think it might be in a mason jar. I think that it might be in the sanctuary of the outside, communing with God, getting a message from, I've been sitting in my backyard for the last several weeks now, and I have learned all sorts of lessons from God just by watching the animals and watching the sway of the leaves and watching the earth regenerate. And so, this grieving process might be a time for us to sit in a place of solitude, in a place of aloneness, to begin to think again, how do we live communally? How do we live so that we can die well?
And if I may, I think that's an incredible insight. And yet at the same time, I'm thinking about the people who are in the midst of that fresh grief, and who just don't have the capacity to be able to sit and reflect in that way. When grief is so fresh and so new, you don't, I think, in some ways even have the mental capability to be able to start thinking about new ways in which to do that. And I think that's probably where clergy are so important right now, is to help people to be able to do that when they are simply not in a place where they can do that themselves. Even though all of us are at some level of crisis right now, I think clergy can really have a role in helping people to adapt traditions and to create new traditions, simply because when grief is that fresh, I don't know, you can hardly walk your way out of a paper bag, much less try to come up with some new and beautiful way to remember your loved one. So I think that's where we have such an important role.
We do have that important role. I want to stop there. We do have an important role. But it's almost to say that we are not responsible to do some work, that sitting in our grief. So my whole dissertation, it was pushed or initiated because I went to work one day and the manager didn't know who I should go see that day. I was filling in for another chaplain. She gave me a list of names and she looked on it, she picked out a name and she says, look at her, go visit her. Go visit her as many times as you want because she's lonely. Maybe you can help take some of that loneliness away. And so my question began, is it our responsibility to take the loneliness away? Is it then our responsibility to take this place of isolation away? And I'm not convinced that it is the work of the minister or anyone to remove that place, because there is work that's happening in that solitude. Even Jesus, if we look at his plight through the Garden of Gethsemane, he was lonely. That is a place. So if we say that we're supposed to be following and doing the work of Christ, we're the disciple of Christ, and we're going to do all that Christ did, then we are going to experience some loneliness. And in loneliness, it may not feel good, but he did make it to the cross. And that's the day that we began to celebrate. That day, Reverend Tracy was talking about what happens on Saturday. We don't know, right? It's a lot of hard work. There was a lot of grief, a lot of confusion, a lot of anguish that happened. But there was a beautiful day that came. And so I'm not saying that we have to push grief to the side, but I am saying that this place of isolation, it is something to be found in it.
So let's work with that a little bit, because we're all kidding ourselves if we think we have that much control over grief, right? So grief happens whether we allow it or not. So I want to make a distinction between, I have a member who was married for 42 years and her husband left on a stretcher going to the hospital, was tested positive for COVID on April 1st. And on April 15th, he died. And she didn't get to see him in between that, right? So we can postpone the funeral, but that doesn't postpone her grief.
That's right.
Right? That process is going to happen. It's going to happen however it happens. So there's this balance between personal grief and communal grief. And I'd like for you all, because this is what you deal with all the time, to talk a little bit about perhaps, depending on how you feel about it, do we place unfair burden on people to make their process suit our needs, right? And I don't mean just as clergy, I mean as community, right? Do we have expectations of people that they will look and act and be a certain way in their grief? And how do we manage those expectations? And just a question. I'm going to throw another question out there and you can engage in any kind of way you want. We've talked a lot about grief due to the death of humans, but there is grief from dying that has nothing to do with bodies dying, right? So that we are also dealing with a heavy grief just of COVID itself, just of the virus that is saturating our environment. The disparities that it is illuminating between the haves and the have-nots. The grief of not being able to provide for our families the way that we want to provide for our families. There's lots of layers of grief happening. What is the responsibility? What is our responsibility as ministers to navigate that grief with the people that we serve? And how do we balance the need the community has to mourn with perhaps these individual needs that Dr. Sonia is speaking to, and that you have spoken to, Chaplain Julie, and you've spoken to, Dr. Keith? How do we manage the individual needs with the communal needs as well?
I'll go ahead and start. So I think the answer to your first question is yes, we as a culture absolutely expect people to mourn in specific ways that make us as comfortable as possible. I think we expect people to mourn quickly. I think we expect people to get on with life. And I think that one of the things that's making people so anxious and afraid right now is that we're all grieving. Whether we've lost someone recently, we're all grieving a lot of different things right now. We're grieving the loss of our freedom. We're grieving the loss of what we thought the world was like. And so right now, I think one of the issues that's really complicating this is that we're all in some form of grief right now. And therefore, when someone has lost a loved one, that's compounded by everything else that's going on around them. And culturally, we don't know how to grieve very well. And individually, we haven't been taught to grieve very well. And I think all of this is building on top of each other and making it very difficult.
What does grieving well look like? That's what I'm trying to get at. You know, what does that look like? So yes, when you say we have expectations, we want people to rush through grief, I know that is true. And we want just a time limit and then we move on. But we also expect people to wail and we expect people to lament. And that's not in everyone's character. So what does it look like to grieve well?
Well, I think it's so different from everyone. I think it's different culturally. I come from a tradition where if someone started wailing at a funeral, everyone would be horrified. And yet, you know, I've been to funerals where everyone was wailing and it was an incredibly cathartic expression of grief. So I think grieving well looks different culturally. I think it also looks different individually. But I think in the long run, grieving well means that you have been able to acknowledge your loss and yet find a meaning in it. That you've been able to say, yes, this person is no longer physically in my life, and yet somehow I still find hope. And I still find a way to feel connected to them, to their memory, to the way that they impacted my life, and hopefully to the life beyond. And yet I find a way to continue living my life. I think that's what grieving well looks like in the long run.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I believe that grieving well is also about the ability or the acceptance that things are never the same. From this, it really, even in this whole anticipatory grief piece, we start already grieving future losses, right? And so once that loss has occurred, even right now, the loss of us being in our buildings, the loss of not being connected to others, it's real. We are all in these boxes now talking to one another. And if we begin to accept that, I believe that that begins the grieving well process towards a movement towards seeking a sense of wholeness and liberation for self and or others. You know, I don't want to put the responsibility of saving others, but it is a mutual thing going on here. But how do we do this wholeness? And that's grieving.
I think we're also looking, the people that I contact are looking for formula. And I pastor a congregation that is well read, and they know the grief books, and they know the process of dying and grieving, and there are some that make their way through whatever stages that they believe in. They do it quickly, and others do not. And so the ones that do not, there's an element of just deeper loneliness because they are not where someone else is. And I think it always feels like to me as a minister, I just look for dangerous paths, spiritual paths that people are walking down. And so just so that they avoid the abyss and the chasm and they don't drive their lives completely off kilter. So that's the way that I approach the grieving counseling.
It's a very individualized process, right?
Yeah.
You know, I just saw that Bryce spoke that, said it's very individualized, and which it is. But there, you know, I'm hoping for some sort of acceptance. Yeah.
So as we began to think about reentry, whatever that's going to look like and whenever it's going to occur, and I don't think any of us know when that's going to happen. And when it does, it won't be a return to normal. Things will be different even when we go back. But as we begin to think about reentry, do you feel that there is a need to mark a space and time with the death that has been, that has occurred over this season of virus? Is there a need for that communally, or should that be led by the people who have experienced the loss firsthand? Is there a responsibility? Is there an expectation that churches, and I'm saying churches, I don't know when we will go back into our buildings, and I'm not worried about that actually, but at some point, if that happens, what I think people will be anticipating is joy and celebration. And what I think will happen is it will be the first time that you notice that there are people who were with you that are not with you now, especially in smaller congregations, right? Do you have any advice for ministers or for pastors about how we might begin thinking about what this should look like?
I'm very, community matters to me. And I don't know that we have the answers. I don't know that there is a prescribed answer for that, other than the leader doing something that we call deep listening. And so it might be providing an intentional space of listening to the hearts and minds of the people who have gathered. An opportunity for them to tell their story, their narrative, and that provides an opportunity for us to hear the needs of the community. So often, I think that us as leaders, we want to create a plan and impose it on someone else, and that's the very thing that we don't want done to us.
Right.
And so, if that's true, then let's take some time and space to be intentional in the gathering and hear from the community, so then that way the community can heal thyself.
Thank you. Pastor Stewart, do you have any wisdom there?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I like the idea of, I hadn't thought about how we might reconfigure. I'm like you, Tracy. I'm really not worried about when the regathering happens. I think all of you have expressed my heart. I don't know what joy looks like when we gather and we look around and the soul is not there anymore. And I don't know what joy looks like. And it takes us back to the original topic of our death and grief and isolation. And what does it mean? Do you feel guilty because you have survived? What does the church look like in the midst of regathering when people are still in the grieving process?
And
One of our listeners says that the initial gathering will be bittersweet, however that gathering occurs, right? I'm sorry, Chaplain Julie, what were you going to say?
Oh, no worries. So, I think right now we could take a lot of inspiration from the traditions around All Saints Day. A lot of churches have these services in which, they might light candles, they might read the names of everyone who's died over the past year. And I think that can be a beautiful tradition that can help us with this. I think what Dr. Williams said is absolutely right. You can't force people into a specific structure. You can't say this is how it's going to go and then, well, great, grief works perfectly then and we'll just get right along with it. But I think we can provide people with a framework in which they can begin to build. And I think that so many of the traditions that we have can serve in that way, that even if they can't show us exactly how we're going to get through this, they can give us a starting point. So I would look to some of those traditions for that starting point and then listen to how people respond and how we can adapt to them.
So I'm sorry. This Zoom thing is not perfect when someone comes in and the dog starts barking. I apologize for that. I have a question for you. So how do we, not just clergy, but how do we as creation to creation, how do we sit with people in that sacred space of the unknowing, of the not knowing? Whether that's in the with the person who is actively dying or whether that's with the family. How do we sit in silence or not in silence and listen deeply for what those people have to offer or have to say so that we'll know what their needs are? How did you learn to do that? Because sitting with people in pain or as they die does not come easily for everyone.
I'm over here shaking my head because I think it's a hard-won lesson, a hard-won skill on how to do that. I think it's really about learning how to be quiet in the most terrible way possible. I think a lot of people say, well, I don't know what to say. Well, you're never going to know what to say. And the majority of the time, saying nothing might be the best thing that you can do. So I don't really know if there's a technique in how to learn how to do that, except to except to be able to sit with someone and look them in the face and say, no matter how many people I've lost, no matter how many people I've sat with, what you are going through, you're not alone, but it's still unique to you. And I can't fix it and I can't change it, but I will be here with you through it.
So let's expand the question a little bit from someone in the chat who says, and how do you sit with people when you can't be with them physically?
And I think that's where we're learning an entirely new set of skills. I think that's where we're trying to figure out, can I touch base through text? Can I use technology? Can I use a symbol? Can I say, you know, I'm lighting this candle, and even though I can't be there with you, I want you to know that it's burning always, that my thoughts are always there with you. But it's not the same. It never will be.
I think you, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Keith.
No, I was just going to say, I think there is spiritual capital that a minister who sits with people and looks at the Valley of the Dry Bones. I think there's something that the grieving person right now banks on prior story and how you've interacted with that person all along. There is spiritual capital, I think, that the minister has in that process. The calls, I think, are even more. They're more crucial than text. The call, the voice that you can't speak because your voice is gone because your heart is breaking. That is a ritual that I am following now.
Yeah, and I want to just kind of add to that. I agree with that. You know, it's about right now. I'm in my dining room and I appear to be alone, but I kid you not, my mom is right beside me. I'm already thinking about, can I respond this way if she's listening, right? How would she do this? You know, and so if we have been with the person, and this isn't the most sacred, sappiest answer, but if we have been with the living and we have been with them, then we are still with them in the dying. And so, you know, I want to believe that they know that they are not alone. Someone was saying that we should be able to tell them that they're not alone. But if they know us, then they
Right.
know that we are there. If they know us, they know that we are on our knees praying. If they know us, they know that we are holding them in care. And so I'm not convinced that they are alone, but they are with us, or some people might say other spiritual beings, or with the holy, but I'm not convinced that they are alone.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible point. And, you know, one of the things that I ask families before any of this even began is I ask them, you know, how will you feel if you're not there when your loved one dies? Because that happens all the time, pandemic or not. And then I try to get a sense of, you know, how do they actually feel about what it means to be alone? Is there an alone? Because I think that in the Christian faith, there is no alone. You know, we're always surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. We always believe that the Holy Spirit is present. And many people have spiritual experiences on the deathbed that lead many people to believe that we're not alone in any sense of the word. And so I think a lot of it is, if you can't be there physically, to let them know that you are praying for them, that you're with them in spirit, and that they are never alone through their faith. Tracy, you're on mute.
So we know that intellectually, and perhaps some of us know that spiritually as well. And yet we also know people who feel very alone, who feel that isolation heavily. A lot of our pastoral time in this moment, I'll use my I voice, a lot of my pastoral time is spent with people who are not doing well with this time alone, and who are indeed lonely because of that. And so I don't know if I want to say anything else about that, other than it is true. It is true. And as unique as grief is, so is death, right? And people experience death differently. Some people do, in spite of their families, even if their families are present, feel very much alone. And I don't know if there's an answer to that. I just wanted to know your feelings about it. Bryce is saying that God says she is with us always, especially in our final moments of transition from the temporal to the eternal. And we know that to be true. And yet we serve a God who on the cross said, why hast thou forsaken me, right? So that human part of us sometimes does feel isolated and does feel all by ourselves. And I don't know. That's not really COVID related. It is more human related. I want to get back to this work of grief. We have a few more moments, and then I'm just going to take questions from the chat, or Q&A would be better if you guys don't mind using Q&A, because I don't lose them as quickly. If someone types something, the chat goes up and I miss the question. But this work of grief, what is the work of grief for the healer, for the minister? What do we do with the grief that we're carrying, or that we're allowing to be channeled through us if we're wise enough not to try to carry it? What is our work in this? I've heard you say a lot, Dr. Williams, about what is not our work, and I respect that. But what is our work?
I believe that our work is a few things. Henry Nouwen often talked about us working as wounded healers, because we've all been affected and done, have been wounded in one way or another. But I want to take the position that this COVID, this time of isolation, this time of deep grief, is possibly introducing us to the God of mercy, of introducing us to this new space of claiming ourselves as healers, but no longer wounded, that there is now a shift in such a way that we have to, one, accept that business as usual wasn't working, and that we have to do something different. Two, we have to move from other prescribed ways of being. So there's so often, so many times that we are trying to fulfill the expectation of someone. We are trying to follow a role. But just maybe this is the time and opportunity to listen to the still speaking God, to the still small voice that is within, to find out where this shift and new direction is heading and taking us. And to do that, our role as healers is to listen, just to sit and listen. And is that hard? Yes. Is it isolating? Yes. Is it lonely? Yes. But we have to listen. And when we do that, we have to affirm what we are hearing from God. I believe that God is teaching us and telling us and talking to us. Maybe to sit still longer. Maybe it's to go help your neighbor. But there is the work of listening. And let's face it, if right now, if we stop talking, we all start looking at each other because we can't deal with the silence. It just don't make sense. We don't like it. If our house gets too quiet, what y'all in there doing, right? But we have to do the work of learning to listen and sit in the silence. And it's hard, but that is the work of the healer. And then after that, then we begin to model what it is that we've heard.
Okay. So we've come to an hour. There's a question that I did not touch, and I think it, it warrants some conversation, and that's about children. Um, one of our guests asked the question or makes the statement, one of my concerns is for the children whose families are anticipating or fearing the death of a loved one. Do you have any wisdom around care for children during the dying process?
So sure, I'll begin. So Reverend Tracy, one of the first times I ever heard you speak, I think we were in the bricks out in the woods somewhere. It was a place down there, and you asked the question, "How are the children doing?" And that has stuck with me for so many years. And some of that is asking the child, "How are they doing?" or "What is it that they know?" And you would be surprised at the wealth of information and knowledge that that child understands and gets, and may be able to reveal something to you. You know, scripture, I believe it says something like children will lead the way. So maybe allow them to do so. Now, I'm not saying that they have all the answers, but I am saying that that
Well, neither
child,
do we.
exactly. And so that might be a great starting point, is to find out exactly what it is that that child does know, and you begin to build and learn and be together.
Mhm. Dr. Stewart, you're still in the parish setting. What are your experiences with children around this?
Mm. Well, my children are grown, so I'm living vicariously through them in New York City. They are in the hot spot there. My daughter just announced that she's expecting twins. So the role of children in spiritual undergirding has become primary. We have we dance on the streets. We dance on the sidewalks. We social distance, and we're doing chalk art. And I'm asking questions for them to draw their. You know, what does a butterfly look like when it flies to the, it flies in the air? What is the butterfly bringing? What word is he bringing to us? And so I'm just always listening to the children. I just did a sermon on the runaway bunny as it relates to our seeking God, that there is no place that we can go that God is not seeking us. So it's a conscious awareness of where children are, and the winks, the smiles, the tears. What are they revealing? So I'm just consciously aware of their spirits right now.
Some of our guests are saying that children ask the questions adults are afraid to ask.
And I love them for it.
Yeah.
So in some ways, they help us with our grieving process.
Yeah.
Even if that means having to admit that we don't have all the answers, right?
Mm-hmm. And and I think that that is a important place to understand that when we ask one another for answers, we are looking for definites. We are looking for yes or no. But typically, when I engage into a conversation, I always remind people that I don't know is an answer, and a very adequate answer. And so, demonstrating and working with that with children to be able to say, I don't know, is huge. And it's a way for them to learn.
Speaking of answers, one of our guests has the question, how do we deal with science deniers? They are the ones that I feel are the most afraid. Maybe they can expound a little bit for us. Ruth answers and says, the Science and Technology Network of the UCC is working on resources to help with that. If you're still with us, Beth Ann, if you'll give us a little bit more information about the question, we would love that. Go ahead.
I will start to talk a little bit about the science piece. So the work of practical theology is not just how to apply a theology, but it's the work of integrating the social sciences, history, and culture, and putting those three things in conversation, and allowing them to talk to one another to then create and hear something anew. And so it's not that we are saying that science has all the answers. And clearly we're saying that we don't have all the answers. But if we can collect enough information and put it into conversation with one another, then maybe we'll have a more, a fuller answer to begin to work with. And so I'm believing that there is a place and space for science in the conversation with religion and spirituality.
So Beth Ann says that her question about science deniers was really about those who want to deny the impact of COVID among us. Those who don't want to believe that it's as critical as it is. What do we do with that? I would suggest that it's getting a little hard to make that case as our numbers of deaths have escalated out of control.
It sounds like they're grieving. That is one of the stages of grief.
Yeah,
right? We deny it.
Mm-hmm. Whitney asked the question, what theodicies do you use with COVID? What theodicies do you use with COVID?
What theodicy?
Theodicies, yes. Theodicies.
Oh.
I try not to blame God for it.
Yeah, I mean, the questions that people are asking are crucial, and that's why you listen to the dangerous paths that people are walking, because the stories of COVID are individual stories and lives being touched and torn apart, and but beyond the story is like, it's how does God look in the story, and how frightening is that? And because that changes everything about how you deal with grief, your understanding of fear, your understanding of humility as you relate to people who disagree with you. I mean, it's all intertwined.
Mm-hmm. 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 I often find myself wrestling with the binaries that we employ in moments like this. So if someone is healed, is cured of COVID, then we praise God for that healing.
Yes.
And if someone dies from COVID, then we do like this, so we don't have to acknowledge that that all of this is a cycle of life. But I don't know. I see. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. In the joys and the lows, I'm working from a place that God is with us. Yeah. God is with the suffering as well. Yeah. And so if we, or if I stand in that place that God is with us, then that helps to soothe some of my woes and my worries.
Yes. Yeah.
And also, I think there's a theology that can be made from the simple point that we are living in a world of brokenness. And that doesn't just include human behavior, that includes, for many people's beliefs at least, creation itself. That creation is no longer working in the ways that creation was supposed to work. And yet God is still present even within the brokenness, as Dr. Williams said. So the idea that we are living in a broken world is not usually thought of as a comforting thought. And yet if our choice is between, well, God is killing people, or we live in brokenness that God is working to heal, well, I'm always going to go with the one where God is working to heal the brokenness.
Mm-hmm. 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 It's a dilemma, though. I mean, culturally, at least I will speak that it's a dilemma. That just a few weeks ago, I watched as a bishop declared that God had healed them from COVID because of their prayer life and because of their fasting life. And yet there are people who are very faithful who have died from COVID as well. And so I think language matters, especially from spiritual leaders, language matters, and we must be careful how we use God.
Absolutely.
You know, just a caution that we must be careful. That certainly we want to celebrate people who recover, but we must be careful how we use God.
And I also think it's, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I also think it's so important just to think about how we talk to people who are grieving. And again, we've already acknowledged that everyone is grieving right now, but especially people who've recently lost a loved one during COVID-19. You know, when I'm working with people who are in a grief support group, they will tell me that people have said the worst things to them after they were grieving with the best intentions, but things that just came across as so hurtful, like God needed another angel, or, you know, this is God's will. And even if that is a theology that we can make a case for, it's not a theology that's useful in that moment. And so I think in some ways we have to choose the theology that is proper for that person in that moment.
I think you raised an important point, and I would go a little bit further, Chaplain Julie, and say that we have to discover our own theology. Sometimes we don't want to do that work, or we've been lazy about that work. But in times like these, you have to know what you know, right? Know where you stand on some things so that you don't end up doing harm where you're trying to do well. We have about 10 minutes left. I know that there are many things you know that I didn't even begin to touch on. And so I want to give each of you an opportunity to share with us before Minister Sonia returns. She's here, but before she takes over, I want to give you some closing remarks. If there's something that you think we should think deeply about, or some reference materials that you want to share, or something that we did not touch at all, but you think is necessary for this conversation, please share. Can we start with you, Pastor Stewart?
Let me come back to, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around the concluding remarks, okay? I'll come back, okay?
Sure. How about you, Dr. Williams?
Sure. You know, a lot of our talk has been around grief and isolation and loneliness. I think, you know, part of my specialization is loneliness, and loneliness has a bad rep. Isolation does too. Those words are just filled with negative connotations. And so I think my quest or my charge is to question it, to sit with it, instead of trying to get rid of it. If we all are experiencing this loneliness, if we all are experiencing it, then does it not have a meaning in it? So when we look at the 5 stages of grief, at the end of it, I think it was the guy that Julie mentioned, he went back to the family and said, hey, would it be okay for me to add a 6th step? And that 6th step was meaning making. And so can we not take this loneliness and this place of, I want to call it solitude, and discover what's in it? And I'm believing that we will find that there is an untapped gift in there. And we will be able to discover ourselves and the gift that is within ourselves that will help us in this shift and change to the new normal.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
I was just thinking about the, as you were speaking, my mind was racing to why we run from the wilderness, when the wilderness is revealing in countless ways. And the 23rd Psalm, is all about, you know, the horizon is out there. You just don't know how you're going to get there. And so, as all of you have said, the different rituals that we are now changing and reconfiguring are all possible ways that we make our way through this wilderness together.
Well, and I think speaking about making meaning, I think that one thing that this has taught all of us is not only that there is meaning to be made in isolation, but there's so much meaning to be made in community that we've been taking for granted. And I think that, there have been some really interesting trends, for example, in funerals in the last few decades, where people have just stopped having them, or even stopped having a celebration of life or a memorial, and they've just kind of let things go by the wayside. And I think that this time is a reminder to all of us of how important those traditions are, even if we remake them, even if we mold them to ways that work better for us now, that it's so important to just be able to come together in some kind of way to acknowledge our loss, to comfort each other, to make meaning out of it. So even though I don't think we'll ever be together in exactly the same way, I'm hoping that we can learn to come together in ways that are even more meaningful than they were before. And just on a very practical note for right now, one of the things that I want to acknowledge is that so many of the people who are dying right now are elderly, and the people who are mourning them, their spouses, their brothers and sisters, their friends, are in the same age group, and they are so incredibly isolated due to self-isolation right now. And so to remember that so many of the people who are being affected by this new grief are themselves having to isolate is so important for pastors to remember, because we are going to have to make more and more of an effort to reach out to them by phone, by letters, by cards, by any way that we can possibly reach them.
Well said. I want to thank you all for your time tonight. Remind our guests that you can save the chat, and there are some resources that are in the chat that might be helpful to you at this time. You certainly have given me quite a bit to think about. And may we all leave this space tonight with an expanded understanding of what it might mean to grieve in a healthy way, and to be present in ways that help and don't hinder process, whatever that process might be. I want to turn it back over to Minister Sonia. Thank you for the time tonight, so that you can close us out.
Thank you. Thank you to Reverend Tracy Blackman, to Chaplain Julie Strassman, to Reverend Dr. Keith Stewart, and Reverend Dr. Sonia Williams for your outpouring of wisdom and practical theological experience in the midst of death, dying, and grief and isolation. I feel like when I first came across this idea and this conversation, it was an issue that came out of my own personal experience in ministry. But soon after having conversations with support groups of other clergy, and even within the academy itself, found out that I was not alone, right? And so I appreciate what I heard today, and that is that isolation is a physical state, but it is not always a spiritual state. And we must continue to strive towards the understanding that we are not alone. The other thing that I'm really blessed beyond measure about is the fact that this is the beginning of ongoing conversations, that Pathways Theological Education Inc. is endeavoring to do something new, and that is to provide webinars and forums and conversations ongoing around those issues that are affecting us, not only just for theological conversations going forward, but for the time being. And what will our new normal be? I'm asking that as we do those conversations, that you will continue to check in with us. Our upcoming conversation is with Reverend Dr. Keith Stewart, who was with us tonight, as I actually named his for him, so he'll have to do some editing, but just know that it's coming up on June 4th. And right now it's named Caring for Our Own Story, a talk about narrative in crisis. Dr. Stewart does a wonderful job putting together and helping us talk about how do we tell our own story so that we can tell other stories, and how do we reframe the conversations that we're having around our biblical understandings in order for us to not isolate ourselves or others, right? And so I was deeply moved with the conversation I had with him a week or so ago, and I'm so happy that he was a part of tonight's conversation, as was everyone else. So if you were on our chat or if you were able to be a part of this, thank you so much. Thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you to my pastor, Tracy Blackman, for leading us in this wonderful conversation. But most of all, I wanted to say God bless to you. This is not something that we take lightly. We understand that there's real heart hurt and there's real pain that we're suffering as ministers of the gospel. And so I want to lift each and every one of you up to provide you with an understanding that you are not alone, that we talk about isolation so that we can deal with the isolation that we may find ourselves in, and that as we do so, that there are places and resources and things that you can do to get the help that you need. Please know that on our website, pathwaystheological.org, will soon be a list of resources that you will be able to utilize to help you find what you need, whether it's grief counselors, theologians that are talking about these issues, or more conversations and forums where you can talk through your own issues. Please, please don't feel as though you are isolated, and know that you are welcomed in every space that we hold dear. Amen and amen.
Yeah.
Amen. So I give you that. I say thank you to everyone. This recording will go out within the next week, along with our list within a couple of days. So just stay aware of our Facebook page as well as on our website. And I say thank you to you all. Good night. God bless to each and every one of you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Sonia, thank you so much. This was fantastic.
You're welcome, Julie. Thank you. I'll follow up with you. And
All right,
thank
have a good
you so
night.
much. Good night.